And I knew the effects of trauma in terms of how I connected with my emotions, but I had no clue of how it affects you when you're sick or how it can break down the immune system to potentially make it risky for you to be in fact diagnosed.
Welcome back to the Daily Underline, where we bridge the gap between emotional intelligence and everyday life. I am Tamil Manning, and I'm joined here today by my incredible mom, Tanisha Manning. Today, we're going to discuss the deeply and personal topic through both of us, and it's going to talk about the intersection between childhood abuse and cancer. All right, Mom. So let's get to our first question.
So before we get started first, we're going to be talking about, let me just share my screen right quick on the article that we'll actually be talking about. And it's from MDPI, which is what journalists, basically this wonderful article that was written by multiple doctors in psychology, oncology, many different universities across Canada, Singapore, and it's Iran. And so it's just a major, a very good article that goes over how childhood trauma and breast cancer can, go forth. So take it away, my beautiful daughter, and ask me what you wish.
Okay. We both have experienced childhood trauma. You've battled breast cancer twice. The recent study we're discussing today reveals that the significant number of women that was also diagnosed was with breast cancer reported these same issues and being in connection to childhood trauma. How do you feel when you learned about this connection? How did that make you feel?
First, I guess this is two-pronged. It made me feel like, wow, validated, and that really helped me to feel as to why we're doing this episode today. And I really want to educate my women on the connection, and that there is a connection between what has happened to you in your childhood and the many different things that come from that, and how it breaks down the body, and potentially you can get diagnosed with breast cancer. And that's how I was, because all of the different factors that they have out there. I actually saw an article that talked about the facts or the breast cancer risk. And the only risk that I had was that I was African American. Most of them say the risk for women being diagnosed under 35 includes the fact that you've had breast cancer in your family and, alcohol use, just a whole other set of factors that I can't think of off the top of my head, but I know that I didn't qualify for none of them. And so learning about how the connection of what I experienced as a child, going through childhood sexual abuse from my stepfather at the age of 6, and then the multiple things that what that bridged for me, wow, and so learning about this, and doctors actually publishing this, an article, a journal article, is amazing, and I thought was very useful and validating.
Love that. That was a great answer. I completely understand. Thank you for your vulnerability. Let's continue. It's difficult to digest. Indeed, the study also highlights loneliness as a common experience among different women, which is influence and a childhood trauma self-concept. Can you share personal experiences of loneliness during your cancer journey, especially relating to those aspects?
Yes, I think, well, I had loneliness before the breast cancer diagnosis. So I didn't even know that loneliness actually connects the two. And so one of the things in the article, it just kind of talks about how if you are in social economic, or you've had some sense of childhood sexual abuse, you feel lonely at times, because at that point, I know for me, I couldn't tell my mom. I felt like, you feel like you have to protect her, mom, or I felt afraid that I was going to get in trouble. And abusers normally get in your mind and tell you that you that something's going to happen or you bet not tell and things like that. And so sometimes they don't even have to say it. Sometimes you just feel embarrassed or you feel like maybe I did something for this to happen. So to learn about loneliness being a real key factor of tearing down your emotions and this self discrepancies, I was like, wow, one thing that I was telling one of my friends today was that, God made us to connect. He's the ultimate scientist, and how one material together makes pretty much a masterpiece. So, we can't have hydrogen without, to get water, we need hydrogen and oxygen together, right? And then we also need, like, I didn't know, I cook with cast iron, right?
Mhm.
Well, cast iron by itself is only limited. It's only limited to what it can do. But when it's mixed with another material, and I believe it's copper, please forgive me, y'all, I'm not really in science, but that and copper actually make together makes stainless steel. And how many things now it's more useful. And so one of the things that happens with childhood sexual abuse, you get isolated because you don't know how to share. And so that affects how you share with others and how you're able to trust. And so I struggled big time with that. And then it more and more times of how I got in relationships. And so for the longest of time as a single mother, you being my baby, I really did a lot with my children and I didn't do a whole lot of connecting with other people. And so then when you get a diagnosis at 34 and you're busy with children, it's lonely. It's like, oh my God, how can I get hit with so much? And we like have so many secrets of things and it just really gets lonely. And it's such a huge like revelation of awareness to understand how loneliness can actually affect your health.
Wow. I think you answered all the questions I had. No, I'm kidding. I got some more for you. No.
Right.
No, but I was like, that is amazing. That's powerful. Another interesting point that he made in this article was about emotional oblivience, which refers to inner conflict about expressing the emotions and fear consequences. Have you ever experienced this, particularly during your cancer journey or even before?
Oh, yes, especially, with the pressures of, the stereotypes of being a Black woman, and how, I mean, I've heard over and over my life, I have been churched all my life, and you hear it across the pulpit that your emotions is related to your flesh. And it's just so like, it just pushes you down where you're not really connecting with your emotions. And I don't think our pastors intentionally did it. Maybe some did and some don't know because they're not really connected to themselves. So there's this stereotype that all women are emotional. Well, I don't think that's possible for all of us, just women, no men. So and so being in that environment for a very long time, I just did not feel, if you will.
This leads me to the importance of trauma-informed care, oncology. As the study suggests, looking back, do you feel your healthcare provider provided you with this information, this childhood trauma, while treating you with breast cancer? How might trauma-informed care have improved your experience?
I'm gonna say this: having to have diagnosed with breast cancer twice, not one doctor. You know what? I would say one of my oncologists, my latest oncologist, that when I was diagnosed with stage 4, the only thing that potentially he said in terms of trauma informed was he basically told me to make sure that my stress levels were low. That's pretty much all he said. But in terms of an oncologist asking me, even before, it was more so like, let's get this done. It was like a project. And it helped me to think that this is a project. It's caught early. I had a stage 0 at 34. I'm like, okay, cool. Let's get through it. And so it's like, it felt like it really, to me, it feels really machine-like. The only thing, now that I think about it, my first oncologist before, she sat right in front of me and she asked me if I needed some Prozac. Like, she was like, so you want me to diagnose you? Not diagnose you. You want me to give you a prescription for a Prozac? And I'm sitting up here like, what the heck is that? I knew like and I'm with my ex. I mean, at the time he was my fiance, but he was like, she asked you for some medication. And I'm like, it was like, I think it was a little insensitive, and I really wasn't
I
trying
was just about to say that. I said that's very insensitive. Sorry.
it was
That's like, that's no emotional intelligence at all. That's kind of like
right. It was kind of like, but nowhere was I asked, like, hey, as a part of the healing journey, it was more so like, this is the treatment, surgery. We can do radiation. You can go see a plastic surgeon. I did the mastectomy. It was nothing in terms of emotions. Like, nobody talked about that. Nobody dealt with that. Fast forward to stage 4. I only think that oncology, he talked to me about, like, I thought I only had like 2 years to live, right? There's no cure for it and all this other stuff. But the only thing he told me was, don't deal with, watch your stress levels. And I'm sitting here like, the only time that I just kind of focused on my trauma and all of that was 3 years prior. I was in trauma therapy, and I knew the effects of trauma in terms of how I connected with my emotions, but I had no clue of how it affects you when you're sick, or how it can break down the immune system to potentially make it risky for you to be in fact diagnosed with this stuff. So one of the reasons why I'm talking about it is like, and I think in the journal, it's so vitally important that the oncologists ask these questions and see if there are systems in place that would help them to connect with their emotions, even when you're now talking to them about a breast cancer diagnosis.
Well, thank you, Mom, for sharing. I know that these discussions and these topics are not easy, but it's also very necessary. So to wrap this discussion, let's talk about 3 risks of ways childhood trauma could raise the likelihood of breast cancer diagnosis as revealed by this study. Childhood trauma might lead to maladaptive coping skills and persistent feelings of vulnerability, which could impact mental and physical health in adversity. Number 2, the study found that traumatic experiences in childhood could reduce treatment compliance, indirectly affecting medical outcomes. And lastly, survivors of childhood trauma were found to be more prone psychosocial distress, which might lead to higher risk of developing cancer-related distress and other illnesses. How do you relate any of these risks? How can you relate to these, Mom?
So I would say especially the first one, in childhood trauma, where you have these coping skills where it's like persistent feelings of like being vulnerable, and you don't want to be vulnerable. You like avoid vulnerability, and that you really don't like share or open, or it's like you're kind of hypersensitive, or it's like either that or overbalance, oversharing kind of thing. And so I found myself doing that. And you know what? I still struggle. Like, sometimes I could just like in a conversation say, so and so died. And I have no connection. I have no connection to what I just said. And so sometimes people are like, wait a minute, sweetie, you just shared something that, I should be connecting, but I'm really not connecting. And so this has really, it's kind of like, of course, the cortisol levels and all of that could put you in a fight or flight stance. And so sometimes in that fight or flight stance, and when you have adrenaline, you really don't feel pain. You don't feel any of that. And so sometimes it's very difficult. So I've had that. And so the whole reducing the treatment compliance, like a lot of times, yeah, I'm like, sometimes with this, we may not want to do what the doctor tells us to do, follow the treatments, maybe go in another state of maybe thinking about something else, maybe like doing, like not finding other ways, but it's better
Distractions.
like distracting it, like to get busy, like, and not like, oh, I'm too busy or something like that. And I still struggle with that, because now, I mean, having gone to the doctors repeatedly and every month for the last 3 years and all of that, sometimes it gets taxing on the body. And so it's kind of like, you know what, I'm done kind of thing. And so, or even the mindset that I don't really want to share with my doctor, or the persistence, or you get kind of weighed down or tired, or the other part is do you have anybody else to come in and advocate with you and for you, or are you always doing it by yourself? And so I found myself doing that a lot instead of like incorporating my family. And then on top of that, when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, the second time in stage 4, it was during COVID. So then now you're in more isolation. Families couldn't come to the hospital with me. And so it's really, 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 really hard, to deal with. And I understand that we're more prone to be in that psychosocial distress. Like, we're more in a heightened, the very thing that we were diagnosed with. And if we're in distress, if we're not connecting with others, it will be very difficult. And then that will prolong the illness. And it's really, really sad.
And sometimes I can be speechless. That was just a lot of great information, but we want to thank you for your insights, Mom, for your bravery and sharing your story. We hope our conversation today sheds light on the complex of entwining childhood trauma and illness like breast cancer, and the vital role emotional intelligence plays in navigating such challenges. Stay tuned to Daily Underline, where we dive deeper in our understanding of emotional intelligence together.
Yes, and look out for our next video. Bye.